Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. My guest today is Matt Corrie. Matt is the leader of Data Focus, a recruitment practice exclusively providing data and digital health professionals to the digital health industry. He's worked for 20 years with an HR, change and recruitment in Canada, the UK, the US, Greece and France in the public and private sectors, and recently wrote The Data Scientist's Book of Quotes, which is now available on Amazon. Matt is also a life and business coach who helps people and organizations better deal with challenges that requires change and ultimately leading to transformation in their lives and businesses. He is committed and passionate to help others reach their growth potential by working on the seen and unseen forces in one's mind that can be a major blocker or barrier until it becomes unlocked when the transformation and impact starts. I hope you enjoy this episode. Matt Corrie, welcome to the Data Strategy Show. It's fantastic to have you with us today. Matt, listen, you and I have known each other for maybe 4 or 5 years now. We've talked about culture, we've talked about change, and you know, our conversations have led me to think that you're the ideal person to have on the Data Strategy Show to talk about change and culture and the impact of it on organizations and the success of data programs themselves. So before we start that, over to you, Matt Corrie. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get straight into it.
Fantastic. Samir, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me on the show. It's a real honor. Thank you so much. Yes, you know, we've known each other for quite a while, but you know, it's a real great pleasure to be discussing this topic with you today. Wow, let's see. So who's Matt? Matt Corrie. Well, basically, I've been in this country now for, in terms of the UK, for over 20 years. Started off in HR. The accent's Canadian,
okay.
as you know. So yeah, I started off in HR, was a generalist and sort of looked at recruitment. Over the years, decided to sort of set up my own company. So I now have Data Focus, which is, as the name says, sort of focused on data in terms of data roles. Specifically, my vertical is digital health. So I focus within that area. Change has sort of come within my HR background, but at the same time, I think change has been sort of embedded within me in terms of living in different cultures. And I think that's the main sort of initial sort of driver for me. Having lived in, for example, Canada, lived in Greece, obviously lived here, different cultures, different environments, different sectors, private and public, also the third sector. So I've seen a lot in terms of, and having worked within various projects in terms of change in the past within HR and within my previous roles. Also change management practitioner. So I went and got a couple of sort of accreditations in terms of change. Also work as a life coach. Okay. Now it's sort of alongside the recruitment, which is fascinating because again, you deal with change all the time.
Sure.
And you know, we talk about organizations and change, but it's also about, if you break that down, it comes down to individuals and how they deal with change. But yeah, I mean, it'd be great to discuss how data sort of fits in and how change all makes it all sort of wonderful and challenging.
I hope so. I hope it is challenging. That's the right word. Wonderful, not so. And I'll tell you what, it's interesting for me because, you know, I read a lot of analyst reports. There's, you know, the Gartners, and then there's Vantage Partners do something every year. Now, a couple of years ago, Nick Hoyerdecker from Gartner stated that 85% of data programs, projects fail for a number of factors. But the one thing that stood out was culture and change. And then Vantage Partners in their, I think, 2019 survey, the stat that they generated through their survey was, I believe, about 52%, or even more. It may well be more, actually. Might well be 74%. I think I've got my figures muddled up, but are still struggling to adopt data culture. Now, I don't think there is anything as a data culture, and I continuously talk about that in my posts on LinkedIn. And I believe that there's a culture that exists in an organization already. There doesn't need to be a separate data culture. data needs to be embedded and weaved into the fabric of that organization. Just that's what I wanted to explore with you initially, and understand when you as an HR practitioner, as a change management practitioner, are dealing with projects on a scale of, transformational projects. Why is it that we continue to see a culture breaking down projects and not letting them be successful? What do you think are some of the factors behind that, where we all believe we're just going to put in some piece of technology and hey presto, it's all going to work? And obviously that's probably one of the biggest issues that I also deal with my clients. But what are your views on how we can start to assess culture better and weave the data into that fabric so that we can work within the context of the culture as opposed to building a new culture over here? I know that was a bit long-winded, but
yeah, no, it's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think a lot of people ask this as well, and ask that hopefully with their organizations as well. And as you're obviously encountering that with your clients. Samir, I think with this question, it comes down to, as you said, culture on its own is within the whole organization. It's not a data culture. You're absolutely right. I agree. It comes down to the cultural.
Agrees with me.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you listen, you can't separate it. You can't say, for example, here's our culture, here's the organizational culture, and here's the data culture.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot have them separate. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It has to be, this data culture has to be coming from the organizational culture.
Yes. Yep.
And the organizational culture basically means what? It means the leadership in terms of what they believe in. If it's a matter of the CEO, what he or she believes in, if it's a matter of the board, what they believe in. So what does that mean? If we break that down even further, and if we use the analogy of the organizational culture, if you compare that to an individual, one person. So, when I work with people and they have their own sort of overall perspective, they have their own culture, quote unquote, within their mind.
Sure.
If we break that down, what does that mean? That means their thoughts, that means their beliefs, that means their values, that means their behaviors, that means their actions. It also means what their vision is, and something that we talk about a lot, of course, within corporations. But so it is about where they want to go. And data is a resource, is a means. It's there, it's an asset.
Yeah.
It's not a separate entity or a separate culture, as we said earlier, to the organization. And we can be, talking for another, we can come back and sort of revisit this conversation in 10 years' time. And unfortunately, I think, and I'm trying to be an optimist here, I think we're still going to revisit this as a topic. And you asked me what are the issues, what are the barriers? I think it comes down to when you have a lot more people involved, it's a lot easier to work with one person, maybe two people, maybe a couple, maybe a family. But when you start getting bigger and bigger, and when you have an organization, and if I remember correctly, Richard Branson, for example, once he has a certain number of employees, he likes to break that up and then split it off as a separate company. And I'm not talking about Virgin Atlantic and all that, but I'm talking about the smaller companies that he's sort of bought and grew. He likes to split them off and let them sort of run things. And the reason is because I think once you have more and more people within an organization, you start having people who have certain agendas, who have certain egos and want things to be run their way. And that could be because of their own sort of power. It could be a matter of their security, their safety. And as a result, what happens is that it's not about, they almost make themselves the culture. And it's about them and maybe their group or their board or their people. And then they lose that, and then this is, I'm going to use two words, but cultural identity. You lose that sort of, it becomes an identity of the CEO, or it becomes an identity of the board, or it becomes an identity of certain amount of people. And then it it starts sort of morphing into what they want, and the organization goes to buy. It's then forgotten. Yeah. And that's why you have people like Howard Schultz, who in the past have to come back into Starbucks to implement that culture of the way he envisioned it back then, and to bring it back. And that's also maybe one of the reasons why he's still there.
Yeah,
because he's maintaining that culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's the vision. He's the driver behind it. He's the pinnacle that people believe in. Just like Steve Jobs was. He left and he had to come back. And principles behind specific individuals actually permeate throughout that culture in the organization. I think it's a great thing because you talked about power. You mentioned the word power and ego. Now that's a really good thing because I often hear, and well, not even hear, but I often see the outcomes, the results of walking into a new client and just understanding what's happened. And typically I find many what we term as vanity projects. Somebody's come along and they literally have said, I want to buy this big shiny new thing because it's going to be this massive vendor and I'm going to get kudos and I can put it on my CV. Now that is power. But what that does is it disables the organization. It disables them to actually achieve what they want to do, whether that's, and I always talk about, if you're creating a data strategy, you hinge it on the business strategy. And you know what? I hope one day I stop talking about data strategy and we just talk about business transformation. No digital transformation, no data transformation, no nothing else. We just have this bucket called business transformation. And within that are the other pieces, the artifacts that belong within the different pillars and how they will support the business growth and the strategic objectives. But this thing about power is really interesting because when I go into organizations, the first thing I want to do is I want to understand that power. Where is the power base? And often I see that this is something that people forget. They do a stakeholder map, right? Let's do a stakeholder map. Let's put it into Excel. Let's do this, and let's carve it out as in, yes, this person's our friend, this person's not. In the power and ego situation, how is it that leaders who maybe who are leading the data side of the organization, that data function, or it might be from the CFO, it might be from the COO, how do they take themselves away from that ego? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I often hear people like Robin Sharma, no relation to me, saying, check your ego in at the door. And I'm an ex-leadership consultant. So, so it's for me, my background has been many, many years ago in leadership as well. So, coaching and advising leaders. But how do you think from a change management context, what are the things we need to do to break down people's perceptions, people's behaviors, and people's rites and rituals? What are those things that we need to kind of look at and say, these areas are destabilizing or not going to achieve success in projects?
Amazing question. Fantastic. Where do we start? I mean, this is like, you can write a whole book on this. Basically, I mean, there's so many things to say about this question because it has so many layers within it. But I guess if we start off first with the actual person. So let's say, for instance, we're talking about a privately owned company. Now, if we have a privately owned company, if it's one individual who owns it, he or she is the owner.
Yep.
I think you're going to get a different response, a different sort of perspective versus someone who is a salaried CEO who works for the group, the hedge fund, the owner,
who has shareholders to speak to and has to respond to them. Yeah.
You get a completely different answer and different response, a different perspective. If you go there, for example, and you talk about IT systems or legacy systems that exist, and you go into a company that has X person who's in charge of it, and maybe he or she has inherited something from the past. He or she now wants to buy a new system. It goes under their remit, under their CV, under their achievements. So they want to attach that they want to bolt it on, the usual bolting it on instead of getting rid of. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you go through things like this all the time. and you got a new system that maybe cannot talk to the other system, but supposedly it's faster, better, it does AI, it does this, it does that, and even though they haven't worked out what they actually want to do with their data yet. And I think you've seen that quite often in terms of they want all the the bells and whistles, but they haven't got the basics done yet. And they don't even know where they want to go, let alone at times with the company, but they're not quite sure where they want to go with their data either. And as you know, obviously, is that if they don't know where they want to go with the company, the discussion on data strategy and data culture and how good the data is or how clean it is, if you don't know where you're going, if you walk out your door and you don't know where you're going, you go into your car and you put your key in the ignition and you're like, where am I going? And you have a lot of companies who don't know where they're going.
Yep.
So the question of data and how good it is and bolting on AI and ML on it, go and get the gift before you wrap it.
Yeah.
So when we talk about what one can do, it really is about who is running the company and what kind of a company is it, and where does it want to go. So vision is a nice word, nice concept, but if you don't actually apply it to your own life, people say to me, like, for example, Matt, I don't have expectations. Well, if you don't have expectations, then you're going to live sort of haphazardly. You're going to sort of like go with the wind. So if it's snowing today, it's snowing today. If it's raining, it's raining. You just look outside. But you need to also plan your life. And in the same way, an organization needs to plan its existence. It's there, it's alive, but where does it want to go? So if, for example, they might go through some resistance. In the same way an individual goes through resistance, it's like, well, are you in the market to become top 10? Or are you in the market to 10x your life and your business to become number one? And you know what? If you don't aim for number one, you might get to number two. But if you don't aim for anything, if you don't have a vision for, and the vision has to be compelling enough, not just for the CEO, for the whole team, for the whole organization. And if they're not in it, if it's just about the money instead of the value and the service, then why is it there? So data, again, is in that equation. However, it's not number one. And it's certainly not a culture on its own. It is a byproduct or a subset, if you want, of the organizational culture.
Data is a byproduct. I think that's one of the issues. It's not a byproduct. For me, it's not a byproduct. It's an asset. You mentioned the word
maybe that wasn't the right
earlier.
word. Maybe it's not the right word. My apologies. I guess what I want to say is it is a subset. It is a part over it. It's not a byproduct. That's the wrong word. It's a subset. It's a subset of the organization.
Yes. It's
you have
one
a data
of the
culture on the back of the organizational culture.
It's one of the drivers that we, one of the, to use the term enablers, that we would be looking at in order to drive whatever the company is attempting to achieve. And as you talked about, what is the vision, but what are the, to bring the vision into reality, into people's minds, where they're going, and those strategic objectives. Now, I walk into companies and I see a strategic objective, which is we want to grow by 2020. Well, how much do you want to grow? In which area do you want to grow? Is it a specific region? Is there a target? Is there a percentage you want to grow by? So that's the other thing that I often find, and I think cultural habits are stirred and probably come about by a lot of ambiguity. A lot of people using such terms that, oh yes, we want to grow. Okay, so what am I hinging on? What is that growth look like? So that's another thing that I see, but that's probably another show. But back to maybe that is the cultural essence, or how we're trying to. And I often look at it. It's the old adage, isn't it? We change every day. We're looking at change, and as human beings, we go through inevitably huge amounts of change continuously. But then why is it in organizations, and you used the word earlier on, resistance? We find resistance continually. And there's that internal culture, there's that individual culture, there's that team culture. Sure. And I hate the word, I've seen it previously, groupthink. I think groupthink is the worst thing in the world. Why would you want people to have groupthink? That means they just agree with each other. It doesn't make sense. And I've seen that. It's a really, really strange habit to have in an organization. But the resistance factor, when you've worked previously in the HR context, in a change context, what kind of conversations do you start to have with people who are identified on the stakeholder map as resistant to change, which is a very sweeping statement? How do you bring that down to reality? How do you start to generally understand that individual rather than labeling them? Because labeling them isn't going to help. And that's why I just don't like probably a stakeholder map, because it just doesn't mean much until you actually get under the skin, and really get to grips with what they're dealing with.
Yeah. This is sort of going back to what we talked about earlier. I mean, the example of the organization needs to be broken down, I think, down to how an individual would think. In other words, you start off with the individual and you can have an organization, and they are an organization of individuals. Mm-hmm. And in the same manner that individual has to have, I mean, the road that I take with an individual is what their passion is, what their purpose is, and what their mission is. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you then create a vision. Yeah, it's the same thing for an organization. You're in it because you are passionate about it. And if you're not, let's be on the positive. If you're passionate enough about it, you can then create a greater purpose apart from just selling X number of widgets. Yeah, because you just want to sell them and make a profit. Yeah. Yeah. You want to do it because you're creating value. Mm-hmm. And you're creating a fantastic service, and an excellent service, an amazing service. And you're making a difference in someone's life, in someone's business. Yeah. Once you take that sort of ethos and that mindset and you build your passion. And so when you have to go back to what you're saying earlier about resistance, that passion has to be understood and felt. Mm-hmm. Felt. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. 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 And that's a major difference than just saying, I just want to sell widgets. Mm-hmm. And I really want to provide an excellent service. Yeah. Big difference. Yeah. Major difference. Mm-hmm. The heart is 100 million times stronger than the brain. Mm-hmm. And people engage and join in, talking about resistance. Yeah. They join in when they're passionate about something, when that company means something, and they have a greater purpose.
So let me ask you a question on that. I see a lot of skepticism, right? And an individual may have started out very passionate, but over time, what's happened is that they've seen failure layered in, one on top of each other, because of, they've called out, oh, these are the issues that we're dealing with. Yes, we're going to get something to fix it, but it's not fixed. Sure. And it goes back to what you talked about earlier, not buy the gift before you wrap it. So it's not getting the foundations correct. But the skepticism, I do see it, and I'm sure many people see it. This is not a new thing. The understanding that there is no skepticism in teams. I mean, come on, it is always there. It's always resident. I feel it when I go into go into a new client. I want to try and understand why that's happened, what's gone on, what are the narratives around that, what are the what's the gossip, and these are things that when I go in and see and talk about change management, I don't typically talk about a framework of sorts that I'm going to pin somebody to and do this and that. I actually want to talk about feelings, which is weird for people, right? Because they think I'm going to talk about my feelings. Why am I going to talk about my feelings to you? So I want to understand what has happened. What are the rites and rituals that you are experiencing that are counter to you as an individual, right? So how can you move through that to be successful in your job, in a project, within your team, within the context of that vision and the mission? So these are the things that I strive to understand. And it's interesting. There are a lot of people who are very, I don't want to say mechanical, because I think that's probably the wrong way. But how do you, that resistance thing, it's a bugbear of mine. And I don't like the word resistance. I think it's built over time, the skepticism and the feeling that it's never going to work.
No, that's a great question as well. I think it's something that we don't acknowledge in work. And to be honest, I haven't really seen this fully acknowledge what I'm about to say. And this is maybe a theory or a hypothesis of mine. But I think we forget that people who go into an organization, now if I walk over right now to Pret, or if I walk over to Boots and buy myself a coffee or a sandwich, there are people there. There are staff there. They serve me. They know me. They call me Matt. Hey, how's it going? How are you today? Oh, you got a haircut or whatever. And then if you go into an organization, these are all individuals. And these individuals have likes and dislikes. And some of them may also have things in their own lives. And I think, at times forget that we cannot separate the Matt at home from the Matt at work. We like to think that Matt puts on his suit and his tie and goes to the office and becomes, Superman, corporate Superman.
I was just about to say Clark Kent.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm at home and I'm all chilled out. I'm with my partner. I mean, whatever, we're going for a walk and I'm all nice. And then at work, I'm like this Superman, and I can do everything. But I'm still the same person.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we tend to forget, is that it's the same person. And who you see at home is definitely representative, is someone the same. You will basically see the same person at the office. He or she may not bring their slippers and their pajamas and whatever. But my point is that they're still the same person at work. They're not radically different. So they don't have, a lobotomy when they leave home, and go to the office and they plug in the disc, and they become who, the corporate, person suddenly. No. Yeah, they're professional. They do their work. They do their hours. They do what they've been told to do. They do what's on their PDP in terms of the personal development plan. But they're still the same person, and they're still going to have resistance. And they're still going to have maybe negative feelings. And you know what? I don't like him, and I don't like her. And she's a whatever, and he's a whatever. And he's great or she's great. So you're going to have likes and dislikes. And it has to do at times with their own stuff. That they maybe haven't resolved. So one thing that we also maybe are not everyone's aware of, but when you think about our brain and you think about our mind, we all think that every single morning we get up and we go to work and we go to sleep and whatever, that our conscious mind is doing everything for us. I made my porridge in the morning. Yeah, of course. I consciously turn on the stove, whatever, put the milk in, etc. It's all conscious. But we are actually 90 to 95% functioning on a subconscious
absolutely
mind. And people think, no, but I'm different. I got 90% conscious. I know everything about myself. No. This applies to everyone. It's not like, that. But my company, my employees, they all function 100% conscious. They know everything about themselves. They have no subconscious brain. Well, when you sleep, by the way, it's your subconscious brain. And if you're sleeping for 6 to 8 hours, that's the part of the brain that is keeping you alive and sleeping. So, and the subconscious brain can be very also protective. So if you want to talk about how that fits into organizations, our subconscious protects us.
Mm-hmm.
So we have fears, but we also have fears, which is good to have fear. If I walk out on the road and a car is racing at me, it's my subconscious telling me, get out of the way.
Yeah, sure.
Quickly.
Yeah.
You don't sit there and say, car is coming towards me. Too late. It's over. But my point is that, you move. You get a tiger behind you.
Yeah.
You're gone. You're out the door. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's the subconscious mind that is controlling us. So if we're in a car and you got the handbrake on because your subconscious is telling you no for some reason that you're not even aware of. So people think that we are aware of all our stuff, but at times we're not. So when you bring that back into an organization and you got him and her and he's older and she's older, she's younger, he's younger, whatever, all these different ages, all these different people, all these different cultures within that organization, and they all interpret things. If I touch my eye, it might mean something for one person. If I touch my nose, it might mean something else. If I put my hands on my hips, it's a certain stance. It's a power stance. For others, it could be aggressive. For others, it could be assertive. And all these cues. So you have body cues that are interpreted in a different way by someone.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to interpretation and meaning. So when you throw all these people, you throw 100 people into a building, and you got 100 people who think and feel in a million different ways, about a million different gestures, and about a million different words, means something completely different. So you can imagine then trying to have, going back to the original, a vision, and for everyone to be on board, you need to engage the 100 people.
Yeah, you do.
So if you go back to data, you need to, that will be then secondary. I don't mean that disrespectfully to data, but at the same time, it's like, get that right. Get the vision for the organization correct. Get the hearts involved in terms of what they're offering. And then we can talk about, amongst other things, of course, data as well.
Yeah. But within that context, because you know the conscious, the subconscious, and so on, and I understand the automated rituals that we go through every morning. I make my coffee, I brush my teeth, I do this. It's just the usual things that I do. I put my suit on, and I go and see. I have a meeting, etc. How do we form? And I think this is more, going back to what we were talking about earlier, where we've got teams of people. How do we form high functioning teams that are going to be working in one respect towards a particular vision, their mission is to do X. They are working as a collective, as team members in an organization, whether it's a matrix organization within the team or whatever structure they've got. How do you create that high functioning team where we have such individualistic people that require a view around maybe data, or and this is one of the things that I continuously see. And even when I go into a client, we're going in from a data strategy or a data science, or engaging on that continuum of data, and I go in and I say to my clients, I want to do a large component of what we do is all around change and culture, and they look at me and say, but you're data guys. And I say, no, because if I don't get that right, you will never achieve on the data side. So how do we start to build those high functioning teams? And maybe that's not the right word, high functioning. It's a very used word, high performance or whatever. How do we bring teams together that are going to drive forward and have the different perspectives and be able to live within that vision of themselves and of what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it comes down to it. I mean, high performance, you want to say maybe also great results. And what does that mean? What are great results? Is it about being as successful as Apple, who, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of Steve Jobs and, his vision back then, and people are on board. I'd like to think that they're on board in terms of their vision. And recognizing them. So when you go to an iStore, an Apple iStore, and you hear the term, what's the name of the position that of these sort of Apple sort of iStores? I mean, the iPhone sort of stores that they have. What are they called? I'm not sure if you've heard what they're called.
I have no idea. I'm not an iPhone user.
You're not. Okay.
I have no idea.
Well,
I'm not into iPhones.
So when you go into an Apple shop and you go up to fix your phone for whatever reason, you want a new cover or whatever, or new sort of headset, and they're called Geniuses.
Oh wow!
So you go to the Genius bar.
That's amazing.
So
that's cool.
Yeah, you can imagine. That. Yeah, can you imagine? Yeah. So I mean, right away they're acknowledging them. They're respecting them.
Yes.
They show great admiration to them in terms of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an example. But I'm going to use another example. Apart from individuals, because teams are, of course, consist of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
You have, for example, the Navy SEALs.
Mm-hmm.
And they are deemed as being very close, very connected as a team.
Mm-hmm.
They have a mission.
Mm-hmm.
They are passionate in terms of what they do. They don't think of themselves as killing machines, but they think of themselves as being defenders of liberty. I like to think defenders of freedom, defending their country, to protect their citizens. That is an amazing purpose. And it's not here. It's here.
It's here.
They are there to fight. They didn't go by the order. My boss told me to do this.
Yeah.
It's like, I am doing it to save my people.
Sure.
I'm doing it to save my country.
Yeah.
So when people go out, I mean, so that's one thing in terms of, I mean, just using Navy SEALs, it might be the RAF. It might be another organization.
No, that's fine. I mean, I get that, because they've got that purpose, as you say. And I think coming back to it, purpose is the thing that has been, talked about many, many times for many years now. From when I was doing. I studied the leadership circle, and I've done a whole bunch of other things, and being a leadership consultant for government. So from that end of the spectrum, I hear the purpose bit all the time, but I don't see it, really permeated within teams. And I think that's something, even when I build data teams, it's something we talk about quite a lot. We talk about what's the purpose, because if we don't have a purpose, how can we connect to what we're doing? How can we actually, instead of being here, as you say, here, that's what we want to do. And I think those are kind of conversations that people get slightly, what's he talking about? I have to have feelings about this? No, you don't have to have feelings, but you have to be compelled to be able to have that purpose, the feeling of why you're doing it. And the why is important for me. Why are we doing this thing? Because actually for these reasons, because if you don't get the why right, there's no point. It's when I go in and do data strategy, I ask them, why are you doing this? So what's the purpose? Even just building data products, why do you want to build that? They're not asked that question. And that's the purpose, that's the connection, that's the emotional context. That's whether it's the emotion to the customer, whether it's a product for an individual user internally or a team. It's the purpose and the reason and the why behind it. So it's really important for me to understand those things, and that's part and part of the cultural activities. But very seldomly, it's always I walk in and I see some Big Four consultancy has come in and put a framework up there, and that's the framework they work with. And I just think, what does it mean? How do I connect with that picture? And it's just a set of, you must do this and you must do that.
Exactly. When you say connect, where are you referring to?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, they are connecting to a, it's like a, there's a picture. And it says that, in the change management continuum, you must be like this at this point and like this at that point. And it's almost then you become robotic around it. And that's not the way that we behave. I don't think.
And which part of your body connects to that potentially?
Well,
if it does,
it's not the heart. It's not the heart at all, you know. And it's your mind thinking, is this the right thing, or is that the right thing, or it can't be as prescriptive as that, can it? Can it be as prescriptive as a model telling me what I must do?
As long as you feel engaged. I mean, when we use the word engaged, you know, what is it really that engages us? Let's face it. What is it? Is it our heart, or is it our mind?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, am I going to work just because you know they pay me a certain amount, just for that reason? You know, whereas I have another company that is coming out with an amazing service, a great product that's going to help millions. Well, you know, to use a Warren Buffett sort of expression, you know, I tap dance to work. You know, so what does that mean? Now you might say he's a billionaire, you know, and he's tap dancing to work. Okay, he loves what he does, and there are billionaires out there maybe who potentially, I hope that they all love what they're doing. But it is about having yourself invested in it. Are you invested in it?
Yes.
And I don't mean your wallet. I don't mean if you've invested funds in the company. Are you in it?
Yeah.
So when you have, for example, you know, when we talked about, there's also teams, there's also sports teams that love and honor their team. They honor their team. You know, imagine if you honored your company. Imagine if you loved your company. You might say, some people might say, oh, come on. I mean, I'm like, love my company?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, why not? What would you need to do? Imagine if you asked it, what would you need to do if you loved the company that you work for?
Yeah.
You know, how many people are going to say, well, if I was given 5K more?
Yes.
I wonder how many people would actually come out and say, I would love my company if they gave me 5,000 more. Really? I wonder. I think they would say things like, maybe their training, maybe if I understood where the company's going, maybe they might say things like, if they gave me a chance to do certain things. So again, you know, you'll find people sort of then expressing things that they may be potentially lacking in their own lives in general. And I don't mean just at the office, but I mean also at home.
Generally, yeah.
So, you know, the person that you see at work is definitely a very good example or a very good representation of who they are in real life. You know, let's face it, you can only fake it at work or in life up to a certain point. You know, how long can you be faking it, you know, and be a different person?
That's not going to work. I mean, you know, it's never going to work. I don't think you can be a completely different person. You can, you know, I mean, we're not robots. We can't switch parts of ourselves off. We can't limit what we do. Maybe perhaps we can think about what we're going to say and apply certain things in our minds, which is practical common sense. But I don't think we can switch parts of ourselves. I mean, I remember, you know, I'm an extrovert. That's what I am. I'm an extrovert. I will sit in an office. I remember I used to work for a large management consultancy. We used to sit on the 4th floor, and every Fridays we used to come back from the clients, and everybody would be there, and I'd be sitting at my desk, and I'd see one of my colleagues at the other end of the room, and I'd get up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And people would think, "This guy's nuts. Why is he doing that? You know, who is this guy?" And all you could hear was the tapping of keyboards. No one spoke to each other. I mean, it's crazy. You know, there is a life within, you know, within an organization. There is there might be a very, you know, certainly in the management consultancy I work for, there was a very high achieving, high performance culture. But that doesn't mean you have to become a robot. It doesn't mean I have to have a frontal lobotomy every time I walk out in the mornings. On that note,
yes,
we're going to have to finish up. And Matt, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I have enjoyed our conversation. You know, it's brought back to me a lot of the things that I used to do many years ago. Fantastic conversations, and I think we could talk for a long time. But it's been a wonderful chat, and I really
for me too.
gracious to have you on. And you know, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
For me too. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation again. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.